January, I was at my property in Inverloch when obviously I heard about the fires, and we were watching that very closely, like everybody else in Victoria certainly was, in terms of looking after their own property. But when I realised what had happened, I contacted RFDS Victoria, and I started doing some consultancy work with them in Mallacoota. So what I'd like to talk a bit about today, and I'll try and keep an eye on the time, but please give me the signal too, because as you can imagine, this is an area that I could probably talk on all day. Health in general and mental health after disasters is what I specialised in when I did my postgraduate research when I studied psychology. So it's very dear to my heart, the health of people post-disaster. As you would imagine, something like a fire or a flood in Queensland last year, they don't always come out of the blue. People often have time and preparation, but what I've heard for many, many years is nothing can prepare you for some horrors. And I think that's an overwhelming sort of response that people get. It's this feeling of unpreparedness, this feeling of, I can't cope with this. It's the terror at the time can be so extreme that it might stay with you forever. It might stay with you for some weeks. It might not be evident initially that anything's really happened, but it can come sometime later. And I have many colleagues who are emergency workers, and I've worked with Victorian SES, the CFA, I've worked with paramedics, I've worked with doctors and nurses and volunteers. So all sorts of people are vulnerable to feeling the effects post-disaster. So at the time, as you'd imagine, you go into a fight-flight, a fire's coming, there's a threat. It's like any other sort of threat in many ways, that you feel in danger, that you might die, or your house might go, you might suffer incredible losses. So the body automatically and quite rightly sets up a series of physiological events to try and get you out of that danger. But you might not be able to get out of the danger because you've chosen to stay and defend. So you can imagine your heart rate going, your pulse is going up, your blood pressure's going up, your breathing rate's going up. You can feel terrified. Or have you heard of fight, flight, freeze? Some people can actually go into a freeze sort of situation. So all those sorts of physical reactions occur to most people normally. That's what you'd expect to happen. Has anyone experienced that sort of event? Have they ever had a fight, flight for any reason? Run in front of a bus and it's about to run you over? Been public speaking? I was talking to some people earlier who are terrified now that I'm going to call them up to practice their skills. But fight, flight should happen to us. The brain wants us to run away from danger. And it's not surprising then, is it, that many of the symptoms that I see people discuss or they come to talk to me about are fight, flight type symptoms. So even weeks after the event, it's still, the thoughts are going around their mind, oh, did I do the right thing? Oh, I should have got out, I shouldn't have put my kids through it. So they're going through the sorts of signs and symptoms still that you'd expect in the immediate danger. But it makes sense in a way too, doesn't it, that the brain keeps rehearsing things because the brain doesn't want you to go back in that situation again. So when we talk about initially in the event, the initial event that you're going through, you expect to have these symptoms occurring, and they're not always helpful. See, and I imagine that CFA would understand these people that are putting themselves in these situations all the time. You get better. We have a fellow nurse here. You would imagine then there have been times, I imagine, that you've been in situations when I don't know what to do, all this is happening, and it can be quite terrifying. But the more you get experienced, the better that gets. But these are events that people often have no prior knowledge of. They might think they have some understanding of what it will be like for the fire to come, but what they've told me later is they really had no idea. We do try and advise, as CFA was doing earlier, that if people are likely to be in these situations, they try and anticipate the sorts of feelings that they might go through, the sorts of physical things. And the way we ask people to do that is try and remember a time when you were really scared. was it just because you had to stand up in school and do a talk, or was it because, there was a fire coming for you, or there was a snake you just stood on? That scared the bejesus out of me when I stood on a snake once, when I thought it was the hose and realised it wasn't. The hose was lashing around my leg. Boy, did I have fight flight. I even ran probably 50 metres at an incredible rate, and I'm no runner, and I jumped at great risk to myself over a large fence. Well, when I looked later, it was a little bit of chicken wire, a foot high. That was a fight flight. And for weeks later, as soon as I saw the hose, I could get those same symptoms. This is what people are telling me about now, weeks and weeks and weeks post fires. They are still feeling a lot of that. They smell a bit of smoke, and it was only because the wood-fired pizza in the takeaway shop smells were coming out, and they straight away went back into that fight-flight type situation. So, one of the things that concerns me a bit as a health practitioner is that when people, and I've got a lot of experience of this from up north, they have no problem stopping for road accidents. They wouldn't think twice. They wouldn't not stop at a car accident. They wouldn't not stop if someone was holding their chest and feeling like they were in pain. That they're a lot more hesitant to perhaps go and say, oh, I think my dad's got depression, or I'm getting these feelings of anxiety. So what we encourage people to do is really understand what mental health difficulties look like, and recognise them for yourself for a start, and get some help, because like most other illnesses, it's far better if you treat things quickly. Get some help if you're concerned for yourself, and some of the symptoms that you're experiencing at the time of a disaster aren't going away. You're still not sleeping properly. You're still experiencing thoughts all the time about the fire. You might be having nightmares. What other sorts of signs and symptoms might you expect when people are trying to recover from fires and disasters and floods and things like that? Isolation, yes. So they're not going out and doing their job the same. They're not mixing with their friends, things like that. Yes, we see that a lot. Absolutely, and you can do that just internally, like nearly go numb, that sort of thing. So people will at the straight after the event will often, I don't want to think about this, I was just mentioning to someone earlier that after the 09 fires I felt like I wanted someone to come with a big ute and take away all the chainsaws, because months and months and months after the fires everyone was still cleaning up and chainsawing, and one woman said to me, I just want him to come and play with the kids just for 5 minutes. So there is, in some ways, people numb, they try and avoid reminders of the event, or they try and avoid thinking about it themselves, because they really, it's not that they can't cope, it's their way of coping. But it's not normal, and I've heard many people say in the years since Ash Wednesday, it's a new normal. Things will never get back to normal. They have the same sort of, life still, they're going back to the same job, but everything's changed. Anger and domestic violence do go up, and again, so understandable, isn't it? It wasn't my fault that the house burnt down, or it wasn't my fault, this is an uncontrollable thing, and the agitation and the guilt sometimes, I've survived, someone else hasn't, or someone else hasn't. There's a whole tumult of emotions that is going on. So this is some of the areas that I try and help people with, and other mental health clinicians help people with. What I think is a really important thing to get across is that people have been through very, very difficult times, and in those difficult times there's certainly a lot of memories, and those memories are very sensible memories, because you want to try and remember not to get into the same situation again. So what I spend a lot of time doing is trying to get people to do some of that self-care. Of course it's understandable, everyone wants to clean up, and that's what you do in the early stages, and you have to get your insurance things done. But really you do need to still try and reset that brain in a way that it's time now that get into a routine. One of the things that goes, and what you see all the time, is that inability for people to say, it's okay, I can go and have a fun night with my friends, I can get some pleasure back, I can take some time off. So if we could increase pleasure in communities devastated by various disasters, that would help, but a lot of people won't let themselves. Same thing happens in depression. It's one of the things to go. Hope goes, they've had enough, they're exhausted, they're so busy trying to just get themselves back to normal and arrange their life again and look after everybody, that everything that used to give them sort of pleasure and enjoyment of life has gone. So we look at things like normal routines again. See if you can sleep better, because sleep's one of the first things to go. Why would you sleep well when you might have to look over your shoulder because something could be on fire? So they're all the sorts of things we get people to do. Try and get people to stop making major life decisions, and that's really difficult, isn't it? Then your house is burnt down, you've got to do all this stuff with insurance and you don't have a car, and maybe the kids need to go to a different school, and someone says, try not to make a major life decision when you're under stress. But they're things that are worth thinking of. If you're in the situation that you might notice somebody else is not going so well, what would you do? So would you immediately stop as if they're having a heart attack? If you thought someone's avoiding going to the same situation, they're avoiding going to work, would you feel comfortable going up and saying, how are you? There's a few more nods than there would have been 10 years ago. Because what I used to get continually when I worked with Beyond Blue, doing a lot of workshops throughout remote area Australia, is no, you don't talk about it. No, it might embarrass you, wouldn't do that. No way. Now we've had things like looking over the farm gate and how to help a mate. I'm really pleased to see people nodding, because what you do with someone who you're worried about, so they've been through an extreme situation, or they're just not themselves, they're not getting back to sort of normal, is you ask them how they're going, but be prepared to listen, because isn't it easy to go, oh, how you going, mate? Oh, look, I've just got to go. Oh, right, you know, it's really easy in some ways to brush it off. So a really important thing to do when you're worried about someone, and that's things like people are avoiding. They might be still upset. You expect people to be distressed at the memories of things, and they can go up and down with these sorts of reactions. But if that's really a sort of persistent thing, so someone's not normally tearful or not normally really angry, but here they are a couple of months down the track and they're still not good, that's where it's time to perhaps step in as a first aider. So just think again, you wouldn't hesitate if it was a heart attack. Why am I hesitating here? Ask them how it's been for them for the last couple of months, and get a bit more understanding of things like post-traumatic stress. Get an idea of the sorts of signs and symptoms that seem to be normal. So people in a stressful situation, so they're jumpy and they're on edge, but they're not going away. Does that make sense? And when you think that their life just hasn't got back to normal, their relationship seems strained, or it's just really interfering with their whole life, that's time to sort of step in and see if there's something else you can do. Have the conversation, and then because you've been here today, even look at some of the suggestions we've got as to where people can get help, because there's a lot of things that I can do in the early stages, and this is still early stages, believe me, particularly when I've worked with war vets and they're trying to get treatment 20 years later or 40 years later. Get it early. So the sorts of things someone like myself can do is help someone get back to sleep. And doesn't that fix a lot of things? If you're sleeping better again, then a lot of the ways that you manage your other symptoms is easier if you're not constantly exhausted. So have the conversation, and then even if you say to someone, look, what about just seeing the GP? Because if you said straight away, oh, I saw this psychologist the other day and she seemed to have some sensible suggestions, I hope I did. But if you don't want to go straight into the mental health, you can say, well, look, it seems like a lot of people around Mallacoota at present, or Buchan or Bairnsdale or wherever, are having difficulty with this and the memories of it. Why don't you see the GP and see if there's something that can be done to help you sleep? So be practical. Just go for the practical first aid type solutions. The sorts of places that might come to mind too are things like Beyond Blue. they've got excellent stuff on their website. There's just even showing you that these sorts of things on reducing stress and how to help with sleep. It's normalising what people are going through. Why wouldn't you still be a bit stressed? Why would you not get better though? Why would you not do some strategies to get some help? So look on those sites yourself. If often it comes to mind if the person doesn't want to go to the GP and you're starting to worry about how depressed they are or how much they're avoiding going out, then it could be something that you might think about Lifeline. So what might be going through your mind if someone has been, I'll give you an example from Queensland, they were needing to shoot millions of cattle. And the people doing it were the ones who were previously caring for the cattle, and it was their property and it's their livelihood that they lost. And here, one of the helicopter pilots said to me one day, I really didn't want to leave him on his porch with his gun after he'd shot his whole livelihood. And a lot of people don't want to mention suicide. They don't want to think about it, but for me it's part of my occupation, part of my work, my profession, is to help people recover from post-traumatic stress, from depression, and prevent suicide. And that's the best thing you can do as a first aider. Prevent people getting worse, help them get to some help, and hopefully if people are starting to feel extremely distressed to the point that they don't want to live anymore, that's the place where you step in just as much as you want to do with the defib when they're having a heart attack. So that in 20 minutes I think is the best I could come up with to try and summarise an awful lot. But I would just like to say too is that we have an 1800 number coming up on RFDS Victoria, and you'll be able to look at the website, on RFDS Victoria's website.